Sir, can you please give me your name and your job title?
Danny Morrison, and I'm a TV commentator around the globe.
I'm going to start with one of my pet peeves. Don't worry, it's not attacking you. I think it's pro Danny Morrison. Every time I've ever commentated with Alan Wilkins, I go out of my way to mention that he took 243 first-class wickets because I think that Alan Wilkins was a brilliant first-class cricketer and now is known just as Mr. Smooth Welsh voice. You took 286 international wickets, and I feel that at times when I follow your commentary, your cricket is almost never even mentioned. Is that something that bothers you, or have you just moved on? It just doesn't matter now. You're Danny Morrison, international commentator.
Jarrod, interesting. It's funny. I don't see it like that sometimes because people often ask that because you had an international career first, and it was, let's call it, pretty much 10 years off and on. Um, and then commentary, I suppose. Now, it's been a couple of decades, so you can see why it dominates because it's gone for twice as long. And I think this faster, crazy world, particularly with T20, um, you certainly sort of the fans will go, that's who he is, that's what he's about, and that's all we know he's about. So you just rock and roll with it.
You took the 8 most test wickets of any New Zealand bowler. Obviously, there's a crop of New Zealand seamers coming through at the moment. That's quite an achievement. I mean, at one stage, you were right up there. You weren't far away from number one. Obviously, number one was you were never going to reach that with Mr. Hadlee. We can come on to him in a moment. But you did have a phenomenal international career.
Well, I'd like to say, and people look at you and go, well, look, he was a very good trier, and then on his day, you could have fluctuations of form that favoured you at times, and I'm really honest about that. Look, I suppose you break it down, and I'm not really a big stats guru, Jarrod. I think I took 10 fifers, and only one of them was overseas in the West Indies, and that's why it stands out in my head way back in '96. Is because, for us Kiwis, we tended to need the ball to grip a little, a bit like English conditions. Um, and when I think about playing at home, like everyone's so successful at home because it's your own backyard and you know the environment so well and you grew up in it, so you should be good in it. It sort of doesn't really, I suppose, freak me out given what's happened post my playing days. That you think, well, look, I had a great time, and you wanted to do well, and I think the ultimate goal as a teenager, as a kid who was 13, 14, was to perhaps play for your country one day and really give it a fair crack. When a lot, obviously, poo-hooed me and gave me a lot of stick at high school and laughed, which you just got on with. And I just sort of rear vision mirror. Let's keep moving forward.
You started very young in your international career, and you played one year of county cricket and it didn't quite stick. I think you played for Lancs, so quite a good team, as well. Do you think maybe if you started a little bit later, had a little bit more experience around the world, you would have been a bit of a more complete bowler? Because for those who don't remember, you had a bit of pace, and you moved the ball away from the right-handers. You weren't the tallest bowler, but you got them to skid through a little bit. I always thought, that you were, very top quality bowler.
Oh, look, when I look at it, I think you look at county cricket, particularly when that South African isolation was on through the 70s and 80s with the development of the West Indies and a lot of those South Africans playing in England in the county circuit. Then you've got a lot of the great Pakistani guys coming in, as well as a mixture of Aussies and Kiwis. Um, it was really tough to get a spot there. And of course, it was only one player. You didn't have the specialists of today doing T20, or you'll play 50 overs, or you'll be more of a red ball specialist. So all of that condensed into, um, there were little opportunities for that. So I was actually really grateful I actually got one go at it. That was part one of a dream. And look, sadly for me, Jarrod, being somewhat vertically challenged, as my dear PE teacher said, look, Morrison, you're going to have to wake up and smell a coffee. Instead of being circumcised, you've had your legs cut off. So it was always going to be difficult for me to get bounced and running and be, truly outstanding. But, that was a great thing for me to fight with and just get on with. And as you said, look, I was nippy enough and could swing it out and then ask questions. And then you develop those skills later on. So really for me, um, the groin thing was a big issue for people either watching or listening to this later on. I had my first hernia there at Lancashire, so I was grateful for them for that, the County Cricket Club. Paid for that with private surgery. Then I had a laparoscopic procedure in '94, and to add to the 246, the trifecta, I had adductor tendon release. So that whole moving centre thing was very demanding. And that very first hernia, I mean, I only lasted really half the season at Lancs into sort of July, and that was frustrating. Um, but I was truly grateful, and you learnt a lot in terms of, again, thinking about using the crease and bowling again with different balls, again, the Duke versus Kookaburra. And it really was, there was those other little subtle nuances, particularly for me developing a slow outswinger, um, as a change-up rather than just cutters that you see today in T20, there were subtle little swingers and drifters rather than trying to cut it so much. So they were great to learn off people and watch Wazzy Nakram and Wakar at times, and then just speak to other bowlers on the county circuit. So that's where we learnt so much of that trade. Whereas today, as we know, Jarrod, you've got so much T20 franchise cricket that guys will sit around the dressing room because now they spot dressing rooms so regularly and can pass on that knowledge.
You said you don't look at Stats Guru much. I had a bit of a look at your numbers. It's quite clear when you go through your career that you were an above average one day bowler. And perhaps if you come through in a later era, you'd be thought of as completely differently. You took a wicket every 36 balls in ODI cricket. Is that because you took it more seriously, or do you think it just the white ball just suited you a little bit better because of the way you bowled?
This is such a great interview because I think I was a lot better test bowler. But you'll have to dive back, and I'd love you, Stats Guru, to go back in archives and see how many drop catches in test match cricket that were off my bowling from 1987, late 87, right through to when I stopped my last test match against the Poms in 97. Because people go, oh, what a knob. What do you want to bring that up? Well, I tell you why. Because if you go through my career, that amount of one innings test matches that I was involved with, out of 48 test matches, I was in 5 winning test matches. 3 of them were for the great Sir Richard Hadlee. So there's only 2 that I was involved with. And then I laugh and I look at, you think about stats. I mentioned that I'm not a stats guru. Well, that's the one stat for me that, if you like, has given me this haircut, is because I pulled my hair out so much. You may be old enough to remember, in 1993, after a great series in New Zealand against Australia, we held on to the Trans-Tasman as 1-1. So I got a 7 for and a 6 for at Eden Park, again, New Zealand conditions, and then got 3 wickets in 3 test matches at Perth, Hobart, and then Brisbane didn't get a test wicket there. So when I look at the amount of drop catches in that series alone, and then the one-day series they dropped, and I'll never forget Benno going, I think they've broken his heart finally, because we changed that side so regularly, Jarrod, that our slip cordon wasn't solid like it was with Jeff Crow, Jeremy Coney, who was a very good slipper for Hadlee, and whether that was Martin Crowe at different times in there, John Reid in the gully, they had a very settled side in those mid-80s, early mid-80s, right through to 87, 88. And so when I look at that, that's probably the one thing out of my whole career that irks me a little bit. Is my average bowling is nearly 35, when I think I'm better than that. I think I'm more late 20s. If I'm really, if we held on, and at times, and I'll be admitting myself, at times we didn't quite bowl well enough, or our batters couldn't deliver more than enough for us. So it'd be a great stat to go back and see how many single innings that I bowled at the opposition. And so, that's just the reality too of that side in the early 90s. Once Hadlee had finished, and you lost Hadlee, Snedden, Chatfield finished in 89, but we really had quite a revolving door policy of quicker bowlers that came and went. Chris Cairns had his own issues after that test match in 89. I think about Murphy Sewer, who was a very good left-arm talent. Willie Watts, Chris Pringle was a one-day specialist. You had Richard Petrie, you had Stewart. I could go on. And we had a lot of guys coming in and out. Simon Dool started in 92, 93, or 93 more. And then he had a lot of injuries with his knees. I had the groin issues a little bit later, admittedly, sort of around late 94 into 96, but I finished by the beginning of 97. So I also probably look at Jarrod as that we didn't play as consecutively as now a lot of test matches. So that's another great step. You look at Test match cricket, is that the Aussies and the Poms played 5 matches, a lot of Ashes, that's just a given. But even against India and Australia, a lot of the time you could have 4 matches, and we never really played in those. So we only had 3 or a couple of one-off situations I recall playing in. Or you suddenly had, just 2 test matches here and there, or just 3 if you're lucky, and then one day cricket dominated. So for me, when I look back at my skill set, I think for me, Test cricket was really where it was at for me. And in terms of hurrying up people, having less variety because I got in close to the wicket and emulated my idol, which was Dennis Lillee, and Richard Hadlee. I had great grace to play with and fortune to be alongside and learn from, to get in close a lot and then use the crease a bit. So, so this is a fascinating conversation because I've never really discussed this publicly much at all because I've just gone, bollocks, let's just get on with it. And, it was such a long time ago in the rear vision mirror that people don't quite, it's fascinating to ask you, you played a bit of Test cricket. Geez, look, you played 48. I would have loved to have played 60 odd because of their groin problems. I think I missed about 17 or 18. We went through once with a guy called one of the other stats guys, another Ian Smith in New Zealand, not the commentator, who I played alongside. So there's a lot of things when I look back on that were, have they irked me? No, not they've irked me. I think it was just frustrating. We dropped a lot of catches. We were very inconsistent. We were known as the Wild Bunch. Those early 90s, we had a hell of a good time. Sponsored by a brewery like Australia when they had 4X. It was such a different landscape, Jarrod, that you still got very serious. You trained pretty hard, and I did, because I had to, 5 foot nothing, and stay fit and run in and try and hurl a cricket ball quickly was always going to be challenging, massively.
So that was one of the reasons I asked you about county cricket, because you mentioned it when you were talking about how many tests Australia and England and now India play. You look at your record, it's just not a lot of matches. And I know you talked about your groin and all that sort of stuff, but I wonder, especially in that era, but there's a lot of teams around the world that still have this. It's hard to develop as an international cricketer when you play a 2-test series and then you've got, a bunch of other things coming up. And you had that opportunity with county cricket. As you said, it was an incredible era. I mean, you would have been there not that far away from when, what was it? Akram was the number 1 seamer at Lancashire and Patrick Patterson was the number 2 seamer. I mean, they had, ridiculous options, all these counties. But I suppose when you're looking at it, it's a very hard thing for you to develop. And, Richard Hadlee, if you go back in the first part of his career, he was a very, very good cricketer. When he went and played with Nottingham week in, week out and had all that, he became an incredible cricketer. And I wondered if you'd have just played more cricket, you would have been able to pick up those other skills a little bit quicker and overcome that, your height, which, and to be fair, your height probably would have been an advantage as well with LBWs and those sorts of things as well compared to, some of the other guys.
Well, I look at it, and in fact, I've just had this conversation recently, was that one of the guys here, a biomechanist guy, is that you should have placed your feet down quicker, like Malcolm Marsh. So the classic is a shorter guy like that to run through the crease is so much more advantageous in terms of your timing through the crease. And the other one we talked about was Shane Bond. Now, admittedly, Shane Bond's 6'2", so he's a good build anyway for a quick bowler. But his feet planted very quickly. He put the back foot down and the front foot down quite quickly, whereas a lot of us had watched the great Dennis Lillee and Richard Hadlee. You think about those guys with quite big, long delivery leaps to execute what they were trying to do. And so, you just followed that because you watched them on TV and they were very inspiring as a 10, 11-year-old way back in those mid-70s. So when I look at that, you're right. If we'd played more cricket and got an opportunity, and the only reason I got an opportunity was the great ones in Akron was they were touring. They just won that Cricket World Cup in 92 and they had the 5 tests of the summer. It was a very long, full summer. So Lancashire needed an overseas player. And like you think about the amount of guys that were asked, again, Patrick was tired and he was a bit sort of hard to get hold of. And a couple of the South Africans, I think, had injuries, fell over, had something else to do. I remember Stephen Jack, I think he was even asked before me. because they had such a real South African connection. Steve Jeffries was another one who played, another left arm who played for Lancashire, South African. So, when you look at the South Africans, very strong relationship with the English counties because, of course, they weren't playing international test cricket. That's why that was their stage, and they really did perform, and they were hungry, and they were keen, and they were driven. So a lot of counties had that relationship with the South African connection. So, by grace, it was just the timing. England were in New Zealand. I remember Big Bob Bennett was a Lancashire chairman, and he was also the manager of the England cricket team in '92. So I sat and spoke with Neil Fairbrother, who was the captain of Lancs, and there was an opportunity. And I said, absolutely. I said, yeah, for sure. I'd love to come and learn the craft and then play for that great club, which was at Old Trafford. And it was a great time in my life. And I was engaged to Kimberley, and we lived there. It was just brilliant. So there was all of that craft learning, as you said, Jarrod. It would have been nice to keep doing it. But at the same time, just a realist as well. There was just so many great players that were on that circuit to do, because the game hadn't quite stepped up until this new millennium, and you've got so much more of another format to deal with. So it's just so much more congested. Whereas back then, geez, we're talking nearly 30 years ago. It's quite scary, isn't it? That just wasn't around.
The other thing that you touched on earlier was the losses. So what you said you had 5 wins? Is that what you said in your
career?
in your career?
3 of them with Hadlee. 3 of them with Hadlee, and then we had
2 of your last 35 tests you won.
Yeah,
Does
so
that sound
Pakistan,
right?
Pakistan '94, and prior to that same year before that was '93. There was the one against Australia. Now I'd like you, because I won't know, but I reckon it's true, possibly as a stat, that the last time New Zealand beat Australia in New Zealand in a test match. Like, we've beaten them in Australia. I remember that one in Hobart in 2011, because I was living in Aussie, obviously, by then. I'm just trying to think, was that the last time New Zealand actually beat Australia in a test match to have a tied series? It'd be fascinating to know, because way back in March of '93, New Zealand didn't play a series against the Aussies in New Zealand until 2000, and I remember going to that as a luncheon ceremony, and that's 2000. And then again, I don't think they played until 2005, and then again in 2010. And then you think from 2010, again, when Baz McCullum finished, didn't he, in 2016, he got that fastest test 100 ever. So when you look at the spasm of over 30, or almost 30 years, 1993, to having a full test series of 3 tests, a full test, 3 tests, and it's not that many test match series in New Zealand with Australia to have a victory, because, as I say, there's that one in Hobart, and then there's the one in there's that draw. They got that 2015 series in Australia was just full of draws, and then a loss, which was the day-night test match in Adelaide. Don't start talking about that with umpires not being able to see. Nigel, it's okay, Nigel. I'm still having therapy, Mr. Long. So it's amazing what you remember to see live, isn't it, these days? So, Jarrod, I reckon it'd be fascinating to know if that was in fact New Zealand's last ever test match over Australia in New Zealand.
It is. I just had a look. You're right.
Yeah.
It's I mean, there haven't been a lot of tests, which go back to what we were talking about a minute ago. There haven't been a lot, but yeah. And you took a big 6 for. That's my memory in that match. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's right. And I remember Dipak opened the bowling in the second innings, and we're just laughing about that, having a beer here in the Maldives on our transitional way back to Australia. Tubby ran past one. Who was talking about that? Was it Haydos? Someone was laughing about that, going on about that he ran past Dipak and they gave him so much stick. It was like a run out, but he just sort of went out to the milk bottles out and just stayed out, and the door closed. Bizarre. But you're right, we won that, and that allowed us to draw the series 1-1 and hold the Trans-Tasman Trophy for the last time we've held it. Must be. Isn't that freaky?
So that that period up until about 93. So in the 80s, you could make a very, very good claim that New Zealand's the third best team in the world in Test cricket. And obviously, incredible up until the 92 World Cup, had a lot of success. Then the team does drop off, as your record sort of suggests there. What is it like to be representing your country when you were losing that much and you've just had success? You've come out of probably, well, unarguably the greatest era that New Zealand cricket's ever had. What is it like to be running into bowl with Richard Hadlee now off, retired? As you said, all these different guys coming in, getting injured. Martin Crowe has left. It must, and you being the talisman. I mean, the two of the wins that you played in, you took big wickets as well. Like a lot of pressure on you personally. You were one of the more senior players probably by that point, also.
It's funny, Judd. My recollection, and I've actually got not a bad memory at times. We could be selective, but you just got on with it. It was that those guys. No one can play forever, and certainly Richard Hadlee tried his best. He was 39, for goodness sake, there in Birmingham in 1990. It's extraordinary to play that long. But I remember speaking with him at times, and you get those sort of guys that come along once in a generation, and particularly Hadlee from New Zealand. And when you look at John Wright, who played at Derby for a long time, and Michael Holding. And Peter Kirsten and all that. And then you had Martin Crowe playing and making his way with a bit of county cricket in 84 and filled in for Viv and Joel, and then took over that in 87. So he was around quite a bit playing some of that to get experience. Jeff Howarth, of course, with his connection at Surrey. So there was that nucleus of those guys that played a lot of county cricket. You could see how that helped through the 80s. So they really were. They were seen as a lot of those guys were folk heroes. Chris Kender's father Lance, the big hitting sixes at the MCG and that shoulderless Excalibur bat. So it was fascinating to grow up through that, and then suddenly come out the other side as a teenager, and then play with those guys. And I do look back on that, and it's funny because you look at it and you sort of pinch yourself and you go, good grief. You're sort of playing alongside your teenage heroes that you're finishing high school with, and you go, hang on a minute, now you're back in the side with them, particularly late 87, 88, 89, 90. I had a good 3 years with a lot of those senior guys, Bracewell, Snedden, bit of Ewan Chatfield, certainly Richard Hadlee till the middle of 90. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And then we had this very young side. Warren Lees was the coach. Marty Crowe took over. So it was again, and the big thing about, I reckon, Jarrod, if I'm really honest about this, is that our number one sport is rugby. And when you live in New Zealand, brought up in New Zealand, breathe it, is that it dominates and it's huge. And then I remember Shane Thompson. Now, Tomo got left out on that West Indies tour with a shoulder problem, and then it was later in the night, and he had to go off and get an MRI, which back then it's very difficult. It was more of an X-ray, and we were in St Vincent, for goodness sake. But the management, there was a bit of crisis going with the team, the management versus some of the players, and it wasn't easy. And so then he obviously limped out of that tour, and then he was all done. And then I remember seeing him a couple of years after that, and I just finished playing. As he goes, it's fascinating. So once you walk away from this, Danny, and you really look at it in the cold light of day, he just says it just pales. Really, considering what those big All Black legends are about and how rugby and the All Blacks dominate and are such a big brand in a little country. And so, yes, we were the sort of number one summer code, but there was always that about with rugby. And Super Rugby had just started in 1996 with the Auckland Blues and the whole big franchise thing of Super Rugby. So there was all of that happening, and that was on, it was bubbling away in those early 90s to happen and break away, and then that Rugby World Cup in 95 and then Super and all that professionalism. So prior to all that, it was massive. And then I look back at, we toured overseas a lot, and whether it was subcontinent quite a bit. I think about Pakistan 90, India in 95, bits and pieces of, there was Sri Lanka thrown in there a bit. Bangladesh obviously weren't around. Went to Sharjah a little bit. Back then, the exposure wasn't what it is today. And so I think when you look at it, Jarrod, it's not on that huge a scale. So for a lot of us, whilst it was, there was pressure, of course there was, and you wanted to perform and you wanted to stay on the side. And because there was such a revolving door policy at times, you thought, geez, these guys are getting injured or the form's slightly out, and it was at times a little fickle. But at the same time, from my corner where I was sitting, I was just trying to do what I could do, and that's what Martin Crowe was just asked. I want you to do what you can do, Danny, and stay fit as much as you can, and this is your job, and this is what you want to do. And so he was very pragmatic about a lot of stuff like that, very good in that regard, because he was up here and everyone else were all down here, so he got frustrated at times. But I think that also helped the scenario, Jarrod, that we really were there doing what we could do, and we're realistic at times, and then you could have your say, particularly in New Zealand. It was a one-day series, possibly a test match, because you'll know better than most, being a historian of the game, is that test match cricket was really quite trench warfare. If you got an honourable draw, man, it was like a win today, and if you hung in there and just and survived, and you got a bit of a kick out of it. And said, wow, we wouldn't lose. There might have been a bit of weather in it, and the pitch was so flat and grotty, you could hang on. But until certain rock stars come along, like Warney and McGrath, and that combination, and the other protagonists around that, and the two W's were pretty freaky, and then you had Alan Donald bursting because they got re-entry. You had some very good bowlers that could take 20 wickets, whereas for us little old Kiwis, it wasn't quite the same. We didn't quite have the superstars or the quality of bowlers that could suddenly, at the end of the day, take 20 wickets quite regularly.
Let's go on to your batting a little bit, because I find your batting fascinating for three different reasons. Wikipedia says, I only found this out when I was doing research for this, I had never heard this one, that you once released a duck caller with your name on it because you tied the world record for the most ducks. First, I just have to know if that's true.
Yeah, it's a shame I don't, well, obviously in transition with this COVID. So imagine pulling one out now and keeping it for you was something like a memento. It came with a lovely little clear thing, and it was the turquoisey blue, because back then New Zealand cricket, remember the one-day outfits wanted to get away from the grey, and they went with that sort of teal colour, which is supposed to be a Pacifica.
I've got one.
Because
it's one of the worst shirts ever made.
Yeah, it was that Pacifica type funny teal colour with a fern on it. And so the duck caller was that colour, I think, with the black other end on it where you go and blow through. And so they had this duck caller, this whole merchandise, because my testimonial season was always going to be about fun and a little bit zany and a bit out there for obvious reasons. And so we had Danny the Duck character come out. Well, you've now tied the duck, the record, so let's just have fun with it. So we had duck on the menu as a food for luncheon. We had chocolate little ducks, and then we had these duck callers from New Zealand cricket. And I tell you what, we were there because they're old Aussie, good Sydney sider, which was Neil Maxwell, who's part of Frontier and now, more recent decades, with his marketing and other companies. He was the marketing manager for New Zealand cricket, that he came into that around that middle of 96. Once there was a big shift and a change, Steve Rickson came in as coach. Maxie almost came along with that package, if you like, Neil Maxwell. And so he loved the whole concept. I was having this big celebratory testimonial season, 96, 97, which ended up being my last playing season. We had duck ties, with this big duck banner. I had these miniature bats, right, from Gunner Moore. They thought, oh, Danny's a bit tongue-in-cheek, a bit naughty. You're going to put a hole in it. And there's these 20-inch bats. You used to get smaller ones. Well, these are the bigger ones. And they, God bless them, Gunner Moore, Pete Wright, Gunner Moore up there in Trent Bridge, he sent me out, we could have had thousands of them. I reckon he must have sent me about 300. There's a big box, maybe about 300 or 400. Anyway, and I got one of the dads at Britton Wynyard, who was the big company who bought all these different sports paraphernalia in and sports goods. And one of the dads had this lovely, almost like a bandsaw. And so he cut the circle at the bottom of the bat, the 20-inch good-sized miniature. And so that was like the ball had blown through there, which they said, Danny, it's not going to bode well for sales for us. It looks like we've got weak bats, they've blown a hole. But the whole synergy around it was, of course, the whole, and that's why you've got so many ducks, because my bats, they didn't want to give me good bats. They'd give me these old buggy ones batting down at 11. And it was a lot of fun, and we sold those, and it was something different. And I think it was making light of all the tough stuff we'd had as a side, losing quite a bit. Sponsors were very loyal. The bank at the time, BNZ, I think New Zealand or ANZ, but this BNZ back then in the mid-90s, they were superb. And they embraced it too. And so I had a wine come out with stumps on it going as a label, but certainly the duck caller was beauty. And it again, it just fitted in the magazine, which was the Cricketer's Weekly. So you can imagine us cricketers were always on those Women's Day magazines, for goodness sake, what was going on. And so I had this Danny and Di, It's a Lie. And luckily, God willing, it came out before Dear Di passed. So this was 96 it came out. She passed on the 31st of August, 1997, in Paris. So I'd had it out for at least a good amount of time. But it was Danny and Di, It Was a Lie on the cover. Because, there was that whole thing with Will Carling and a couple of other names and stuff of celebrity-type guys that she possibly could have had as lovers. And so we had a heap of fun with it. And so it was just poking fun at yourself and not taking life too seriously.
Talking about that, it's incredible that you tied the world record for the most ducks, but you also were a constant night watchman. But so the reason I got you on originally, if you remember, was because I'm doing the entire history of New Zealand opening batters, because New Zealand opening batters as a species is almost the most interesting species of human being I've ever come across. And when I'm looking through this, and I'm looking at at this stage I've looked at everyone from New Zealand who's ever opened in a test match, and your name's there.
Yes,
and I was like, how does this happen? Take me through it.
So 1990 versus India was a great test match, actually. Speaking of one of those 5 that I've been involved in, was February of 90, because Richard Hadlee had got Sanjay Mandraker out as his 400. So Hadlee became the first man to 400. So he got past that milestone. When you think about recently with Jimmy Anderson 600 and Glenn McGrath and Walsh and those guys going past 500 for quick bowlers, quite extraordinary. So Hadlee got his 400th test wicket, and the celebrations have been going on. But towards the end of it, they only managed to make us score 2, I think, to win the test match. So you can imagine John Wright, who was captain of the team, and of course he was an opening batsman, and the other guy was Trevor Franklin. So hilarious. Wright, he just yells over at Snedden, who was 10 and I was 11, we're going to reverse the batting order. So you two North Shore mongrels, because we used to play, Snedden and I played club cricket together, state cricket for Auckland, and then and played some international cricket together. So there we go. So you two could go out there, and we faced Manoj Prabhakar. Now, Sneds thought he'd be just a glory seeker and just smash it and finish it, but he got an edge, and his bat went flying. So Sneds' bat goes flying, the ball lobs up and goes sort of like over the slip cord and lobs straight over, and they get one, so we're going to cross for a single. So I've still got a face, and we're going, how on it? So everyone's laughing at Sneds throwing his bat away and trying to be a glory seeker and slice it somewhere for 4, win the game. So he got down the other end, and I'm like, oh, great. So I think I ended up blocking one, and then Prabhakar, who bowls those big booming in-swingers, I went to just, it's an easy game. I'll just ease this onto the leg side, going with the swing, going with the tide, got a leading edge, went through cover and ran through Salusa. So Sneds and I crossed, and there was the winning run. And it's a great trivia question, because there's a couple of Aussies that laugh about it. Because Morrison, I was at a function at the SCG, and your horrible name came up, and they said, can you name this cricketer? Open the bowling in a test match and open the batting in the same test match and hit the winning run. What? So there you go. So we just crack up. And even I'd forgotten about that. I go, God, who's that? It's you idiot. Is it? And you laugh and you go, crumbs. So, that's what happened. Yeah, bizarre, isn't it? But that's cricket. That's what you love about cricket. It throws up all those crazy old stories.
Well, that's one of the things, like going through the New Zealand openers, that's one of the things. You guys lost a lot of games in the 90s and in the 30s through to the 70s, really. Yeah. And yet there's always a story like that comes along. Like, there was always There was a lot of stories about players like Glenn Turner not being treated correctly and Richard Hadlee going off to be professional and all those sorts of things. But in the middle of it, it feels like no matter what happened in New Zealand cricket, there was a lot of fun there. And you've kind of turned that into a profession in commentary, haven't you? You've taken all the fun from your personality and just be like, well, they're going to put a camera on me and they're going to pay me a lot of money. I'm going to do this for them on the camera now.
Yeah, and when I look at that for Jarrod for T20, and particularly the start of the IPL, because it really was with Sony who had the first decade of it. And so what it was the marriage of Bollywood and cricket together, and they went with that side of it. And that was part of the showmanship of it all, because of the grandiose stuff that was going on in the studio, and the hosts sideline, who started to become very famous now in their own right and doing other things, worked well. And because I also, over the years, explaining myself why this came about, is that my mother's from a thespian background. So she did a drama diploma at Auckland University in 1978, so I was 12. So I was around all these thespian types. My mother's boyfriend at the time ran the lighting show at the Mercury Theatre, which is the big live theatre of that lovely old era of theatre in Auckland. So I would go regularly to watch shows backstage in the lighting booth, and then I was between, we'd moved, and so I was between playing a bit of rugby and cricket developing, and in between that, so you're talking 1977, 78, my mother sent me to pantomime type classes, drama classes, that you'd go and make things with pottery, and you do arty different things rather than just the old classic rugby racing bear scenario. So mine was about then going to this Maiden Theatre on a Saturday morning, catching the ferry from Devonport with Mum, and we'd go across and do that. And my sister, who was a little bit younger, so she made, I don't remember all the time coming to that. She was a bit younger. So that's, if you like, been part of my blueprint. It's in my veins, as it were, to then ham it up in front of the camera or get dressed up and have fun. Now, I remember Malcolm Conn couldn't believe this back in Sydney. He obviously had seen me on Fox dressed up as one of the masquerade dancers in St Kitts. I think it was about 2015. And lo and behold,
I remember that one.
Yeah, my mother's on the phone laughing with my wife back on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. And my son at the time is watching us going, yeah, there's your husband. That's what he's doing for a living. There he is. There's your husband on telly. And the cricket's on because, of course, it's a night game in St Kitts, which is about lunchtime in Queensland and on the eastern boardwalk of Australia. And there I am. They've thrown down to me, and I'm just dressed up in all this colourful stuff, which, again, T20 lends itself to them. And I suppose, in a way, Jarrod, I've massively gravitated, resonated with that audience, and that's particularly the subcontinent and the West Indies, because of the flow of music and dancing and dressing up and actually having fun as part of the, the, in inverted commas, cricketainment. I've got me swimmers, got me board shorts, gone up to one of those blow-up things at St Kitts and gone down the slide and stuff, and done a piece of camera, or hopped in the swimming pool, and the boys have had the boom up and they've tied it to the end of an old big room and had a chat to me in the swimming pool. I've had a chat there holding the product. So you do, and I think T20 for me, obviously is a love, and you enjoy doing, and it's so much on the circuit. But I think all of those early formative years where my mother took me along to Maiden Theatre, and all that exposure was great for me. It was a great learning to be able to be comfortable in front of camera, and then go into a whole genre of acting, come working, come expressing yourself to get it across. And I think the subcontinent market love it. I mean, it grates with Kiwis, Aussies, and English. I mean, it's not about, why you can't look, just give it to me seriously. And I've actually recently got into a couple of things where I just go back to somebody who's just giving you some real bad hate, really. I'm like, and Lisa Stalakas going, why do you go back to him? Well, I just thought I'd just go back and say, look, my dear thing, clearly I've revved you right up, but I don't mean to. But I'm fascinated to know why that's got under your skin. And if you don't think I should deliver it like this. And so they come back and I said, well, and I blow them a kiss or emoji on Twitter and the feed, and I'm just like, last time I checked, brother, we're from the same planet, aren't we? And he comes back and has another tirade. You go, and you live in Australia. God, I love you. And so then they cut you off. So they're the ones that attacked you, and yet they're the ones who are cutting you off and disowning you. I said, oh, doesn't want to talk to me. Oh, okay. So that's where I like to lighten it on lots of fronts and lots of levels, Jarrod, because, life's too short. Hello, what's going on right now with COVID? Life's too short not to actually be entertaining or actually smile on people's faces, because a lot of it's pretty tough and pretty grim.
Well, as one son of an actress to someone else involved in the theatre, it might explain me as well. Now I'm going to have to think about my mum taking me to all those plays and all my time in lighting rooms and filming them, and my mum making me go up on stage and all that sort of thing. So, fascinating interview. Thank you so much for coming on.
Lovely, Jarrod.